if I'm going to fail at something, then let's fail big, and on something that people thought they might at least get some value from.
We are live. Okay. Rob, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a very busy guy, and we finally made this one happen. So I appreciate you making the
I know,
time to
sorry that took
come
so
on.
long. That was ridiculous.
Oh, that's
I was
okay.
ill, and then
That's okay. I'm glad you're feeling better.
so am I. It's been 3 weeks of constant illness. I think it's the joy of having 2 young children, and then I travelled and I was tired, and so it was just like never ending. I think I have 4 trips to the doctors. Anyway, it's over. That's the main thing. If I cough sporadically, though,
That's okay.
apologies.
That's okay. When I was in Omaha a few months ago, I don't a 1.5-year-old nephew, and I was always sick because he was always sick, and it would always hit me
Yeah.
way harder than it hit him. And I
You
get
do
it.
build up some resilience to it, but occasionally it knocks you. And then once your immune system's been lowered, that's it. You're ill constantly for weeks. Although
Yeah.
I'm not really imparting massive wisdom there. That's just every parent on the planet's experience, or anybody who's around small children. They're amazing, apart from when they whinge and moan too much and when they get ill.
Definitely. But I would love to hear more about your career path. You seem to have started a few companies, and you're interested in a lot of things that I'm interested in, such as we were talking before, energy, space,
Mm.
finance, a lot of cool topics to get to. But I would love to start on the topic of you and your
Oh.
story, your journey, and what's led you here today.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in companies and businesses from a very young age. I was kind of fortunate to grow up close to a place called Goodwood, which in the UK is an estate owned by the now Duke of Richmond, and he put on these amazing events, and I was kind of lucky, very young, to get access to interesting people. And then I guess I was involved in loads of things from, I'd say, 16, I had a little cleaning business, tried to do loads of different things, most of which failed miserably, and which is great because when you're a teenager, you get to learn about people, you get to learn about business, but the consequences aren't huge. And so it's just like you go through that whole learning curve. And then somewhere around my mid-20s, I kind of grew up a lot. And that was only a few years ago, mine. I'm not even 30 yet. But, about 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to meet a great business partner and kind of took the raw things that I'd learned and bad habits and good habits and kind of just accepted me for me. And we kind of went on this journey to build the company we are today. And we're still very early in that company. It was 5 years. We set a 30-year plan when we formed that company 5 years ago. And the purpose of the business, it's called Parkwest, and it's a holding company. We formed it as a holding company. The whole point of it is to hold every idea that I can have in my head. Again, most of which have not worked, but some have, and that's been great. And it's just an accepting sort of structure to sort of allow creativity commercially in order for us to sort of get to the crux of what we're about and build businesses, but more importantly, build great relationships with great people, hire great people, and try and execute that. So it's very fleeting. Got myself to today, and I've been fortunate to meet great people. I'm involved in lots of government stuff here in terms of in the UK and in the US around economic growth. I was kind of fortunate to be an early signatory for sustainable markets initiatives and some great stuff. And so it's been an interesting journey to now. And then the future, this last 18 months has been fascinating because our company's kind of taken a dynamic from, isn't it interesting how we got here, to isn't it interesting to where we're going. And so my whole mindset's been shifting from, when you're younger, you kind of look to the past and you try and justify your existence by the small amount of things that you've done, most of which was rubbish. And now, and if it wasn't rubbish, it was an achievement, but it wasn't, it's not going to be career defining in any stretch. To now, we're 5 years into Parkwest. We've invested a lot of money into good opportunities. And those opportunities are starting to come through now. And I'm meeting fascinating people who want to work with us and are trying to help us achieve our goals. And so it's become this real shift on, where we were to where we're going. And that's been a fascinating kind of transition, which I think probably happens with everybody at some point. But I'm experiencing it live, which is interesting and kind of thought-provoking and makes you think about life a bit differently, which has been fun. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of me in a nutshell to today.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you said you had a lot of ideas with this holding company. Some haven't worked, some have. What are the ones that have that that are kind of
Sure.
prompting you to look forward to the future?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a bit of a futurist. I'm very optimistic, but I broadly, my wife gets quite annoyed with me because I relentlessly believe that people are good and think that people are full of good intentions, and those good intentions are, worth exploring regardless of background or what they might have done in the past. I think like generally people are trying to do the right thing, and I really support people doing the right thing. And that kind of led us to a path where actually as a business we want to be doing the right thing, and what is the right thing. And that was an interesting debate that we're still having, really, in terms of like, what does that look like for the future. And that led us into, and we were talking just before we came on, that led us into some really fundamentals. I mean, from health technologies to communication to energy, lots of interesting things, and that kind of spawned on these businesses. Our biggest area of interest right now is energy. To put it into some context, we've got some companies, all of which probably have a small chance of no, not small chance, let's put it this way, they have a low probability of overall success, but are doing the right things. So we're going after, projects that are currently massively under resourced, but entirely needed in order to meet goals. For example, transmission lines in the US, in Europe, transmission line projects. Historically, energy was produced very close to population centres, coal power stations, gas power stations, whatever, and then transmitted over short distances to those centres. Now we are entering into a world of a sustainable energy future. Even if that sustainable energy future isn't necessarily renewables, which it definitely will be, even if it becomes nuclear energy, you're not going to be able to have it in as close a proximity to population centres. So regardless of how this works out over a 100-year period, energy production is going to be further away from where the energy is needed. And so transmitting that is a problem. And in the United States, we were seeing huge problems. You've got the average age of grid engineers and people like that are really approaching retirement. They're not being replaced because it's not cool and it's not a social network that people want to build an app for or whatever. And so we saw an opportunity in that market to come in and say, right, look, these are essentially bid processes to go and put out transmission lines to replace them. In the US, we've got a requirement in order to meet 2050 and 2100 energy supply goals, not net zero, actually, just supply. They need to lay about 18,000 miles of new transmission cables every year to meet replacement and new demand. Currently, that's 1,800 miles is being built a year. And that's projected to go to 2,400 miles in 3 years' time. We are way off. And so there was a big opportunity for us to go in there, and we're seeing good results there. That's a company called Gridscale. We spun that company out of Parkwest Energy, very originally called, because our holding company is Parkwest Holdings. Our energy holding business is Parkwest Energy. We spun that company out earlier this year. We're currently in the middle of hiring and have some brilliant candidates, hard to choose from, to run that operation and help us run those bids. Some fantastic people, and I'm very grateful to them if they're listening to this, who have come forward and are taking a risk on us because we're a young company to produce some of the finances to make that happen. And so again, probability of success probably quite low, but again, I think it's about people, it's about money and the right ideas, and then doing the right thing. And I think eventually, if you do those things right, something will happen. And so there's that. And we've had some other successes in energy. Another company we've got, again, we spun out back end of last year, is a company called GridGuard, which is a utility battery storage business. We are in negotiations in the United Kingdom for 13 sites under option. I don't know if you know what under option means, but
not actually.
Right, so essentially an option is where you go to a landholder and say, I'd like to build something on your land, but I don't know whether or not they're going to accept me building it, like a battery storage plant or properties or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take an option out on the land to, you give me exclusive right to go and get all those permissions. And if it works out, we'll do some sort of split profit deal on the land piece, so that I can build it. You get more value because you took more risk, and I don't have to take as much risk. So it's kind of like you're sharing the risk on it. So we've got a few of those in the UK that we're negotiating, a lot more in the United States through city authorities and things to build those. Great relationships with Tesla Energy with their mega pack, and Wartzilla and some others around battery technology supply. And so it's a fascinating time in terms of our company. That's energy in a nutshell. I've also got some wild projects going, and they're so early, it's almost not worth talking about. But one of them is this really random idea I had, which is the UK government has insisted that we introduce hydrogen gas, into the gas network, substitute it for things like ammonia and things that you create with hydrogen, and also then fuel for hydrogen fuel cell cars in the future. And they're talking about, how we do this and whatever else, and they want it to be green hydrogen, i.e. it's made from sustainable energy sources, not from coal and other sort of dirtier fuel supplies, if you want to call them that. And so yeah, I had this wild idea. We've got liquefied natural gas pipelines running between Norway and the UK. Why can't we have a hydrogen one using Norway's excess wind energy, produce the hydrogen there, and then pipe it to the UK, and we've kind of won. And so I sent somebody in the government and a load of people that I thought might be able to help this stupid idea in November last year. And this stupid idea has now got us a couple of government meetings. Partners are interested, and so I don't know what's happening with that. And I'm very very early days on that one. But that's the type of idea I'll have. It's never small. It's normally at scale, and we're normally doing stuff like that. Other things we're doing. We are involved in the space sector. I sit on the board of university in Florida, a small little school, Florida Tech. That kind of gave us the inspiration to reach out to, I think I might have to quote this after the fact a few tweets out, but nearly 100 universities around the world that we work with their technology transfer offices, essentially IP born in universities that they're looking to spin out or whatever else. We're very early doors on that. Some of that's in the space sector, some of that's in the healthcare sector, specifically non-intrusive health devices. A couple of those going for FDA processes. So we kind of, I have a kind of attention deficit clearly, where I need to be involved in stuff. I've got a broad view on, education's important, health's important, data and communications is important, energy is important, water and food. So that's kind of like how we're trying to build a portfolio. And we're very, very early, 5 years in, but really 3 into operating anything of meaning. And I imagine we're probably 10 years away from being a sort of reasonable player. But I'm here for the journey.
Yeah, that's incredible. We're doing a lot. How old are you again?
I'm 28. I'm almost 29 in a month.
My goodness, that is incredible. That's like you're kind of doing like what I want to do. A lot of people want to do on a large scale. Like you're really doing it. The fact that you are taking on these, as you said, low probability but high value, at least high value in terms of good for humanity, which we're on the good of Twitter. So we're talking in the right place here. But high value for good for humanity. Like these are huge, lofty goals that most of us are scared to go after and go approach. Like the even just getting started is so paralyzing because we don't know what to do.
And it was for me. I'm not going to pretend I'm some sort of like heroine here and like I'm really good at my job. I'm pretty useless at my job. In fact, one of the hardest things, and I'm grateful I've learned it young actually, is that I'm useless at 99.9% of the things. And actually the things that have got me into trouble in the past is pretending I was good at them when that was BS, absolute rubbish. And I professed to be this wonderful, and what I was an idiot, And so that's kind of the hardest part, is getting out of your own way. And then actually convincing people that you're worth listening to. That takes years of persistence, and most people telling you that you're full of BS again, or it won't work, or variants of that, And the funny thing is that, regardless of how they might say it, they're probably right, and so you should probably listen to them a bit, but not too much, So there's a, you should, it's the whole, haters gonna hate thing, and you're thinking, well, yeah, but they probably are professing some truth to you. They should be listened to. You should take them at face value. You should just not let them emotionally challenge you, and shouldn't allow you to stop doing things. And that's where lots of people get held up. I was held up for a while. I think it was a requirement that was needed to be broken through. I needed to listen to criticism, and which I wasn't doing, and sort of change a bit, which was hard. And then it's like, I've always wanted to do things in a big way. If I'm going to do something, I want to do it in a big way. And so my line was sort of like, well, if I'm going to fail at something, let's put it in this category. If I'm going to fail at something, then let's fail big, and on something that people thought they might at least get some value from. That was kind of my line. I'd rather set up a company, and it's great because the partners we've got now are fully aware of this brief. If they were watching this podcast, and I'm sure some of them will be, they will not be surprised to hear me say this. I open every meeting with, where are we going? How do we lose at this, and what can we mitigate? Can we mitigate that in any way? And so, yeah, it is. I guess it is cool to go after big, lofty stuff. It's not necessary. It's quite stressful, actually. I wouldn't necessarily encourage everyone to do it,
It's what's
but
inside you.
I just can't turn it off. No, literally, I'd never. We were looking at farms to buy in the run up to Christmas, right? Because I'm looking at food supply, and then I'm looking at all the criticism on the internet of people who are buying up farms, right? And so there's criticism of people who are buying up farms, and there's people who are criticizing farmers for not producing enough. And so you've got this sort of huge balance. Essentially, what they want, though, is sustained food supply from quality producers, and they want more of that, and they'd ideally like their food to not have to travel very far. That's one big criticism that you get from food producers, supermarkets, whatever else, is that food is shipped enormous distances, and some has to be because they're fruits or whatever, but lots of stuff doesn't. And so we're looking at that, and we've got a plan. 5 or 6 years from now, it's not a couple of things have to happen first, but to go up and buy up one really well run farming group, and then take that to farmers in Europe, for example, that are again approaching the retirement age and don't have successes. And you don't want those farms to become pony paddocks. You want them to continue producing food. And so, how do we do a deal where we can bring really good expertise to essentially unloved land and regenerate that? All of that's fascinating, but my brain goes instantly to how do we support other people to do this? How do we get every single pony paddock potential in Europe to be converted to food production and farming? And that's how my brain works. I go straight to this sort of like ridiculous, when we were doing the transmission business, we have to do it by planning area. And so there's like 5 or 6 planning areas in the US. And I was, spending my time on Google Maps, like, well, that's going to be needed here. And before long, I'd basically, I want to do the whole US grid. And it's not possible, but, that's where my brain instantly goes. How do we do the whole US grid? So it'd be interesting to see whether or not we can even get one up, let alone. I'll be delighted if we can get a pylon up. But my master plan is there'll be tens of thousands of pylons, and we've all been involved in all of them.
I love it. That's amazing. It's amazing. I see a lot of my oldest brother in you. Actually, I see a bit of me in you as well, to compliment myself. I see a lot of my oldest brother in you, where as you're explaining these big goals and lofty goals, he has like very similar lofty goals. And I think there's something kind of inside each of my brothers, and the youngest of 4, where it's just, there is something inside you where it's just like, I wouldn't even recommend even this, even though what you're doing is way, I'd say more difficult. And I think we're blessed to have people like you that are going after these lofty goals, that are trying to change the world. And we need a lot of people like you with a lot of different skill sets too. But even this podcast, where it's like, I wouldn't recommend to anybody, hey, you want to make a good living, you want to like live your greatest life, let's go make a podcast. Now, I know this is a long shot, but there's just something inside me. It's just like, I'm going to spend the money I need to spend. I'm going to put in the effort I need to put in to go try and live this dream. And as I was saying before, my oldest brother, commercial real estate guy, that's just his passion. And he wants to be a big time developer. And he spent years before he made $1 just convincing people, he wasn't crazy, and getting to know every single person in this area.
Like 50% of the journey is convincing people you're not nuts.
Yeah.
And actually, after a while, you kind of think you are. Anyway, I'm not entirely sure I'm saying. Are we all? I don't know. Yeah, but you were saying. Yeah.
We're all human, so
yeah, exactly.
All a little bit insane, a tiny bit. But that drive inside you to go, there's just something inside you that just, this is how my brain works. This is what I want to do. And the ADD I definitely have too, where I've tried 1,000 different things in my career. And I'm not taking the advice of successful podcasters and podcast coach who said, hey, just choose a niche, become the expert. I tried going that way with the vending machine route, and I was seeing some growth, and I could see the path of becoming this expert. But, something inside me just said, no, this isn't the dream. I don't want to be the vending machine guy. I want to go talk to incredible people and just get to know incredible people and what you all are up to. And literally conversations like this, even though I'm not getting paid yet, I did have a conversation with a friend of mine, I talk to meme creators for the good of Twitter. Gotta throw that in there too.
Yeah,
And
of
a friend
course.
of mine has tens of thousands of followers on his meme account, Dude Fridges. And talking to him, I did have this kind of realization moment where I was like, I am really focused on the numbers, wanting us to grow, and hopefully one day it pays for itself. When his only focus was like, don't get me wrong, it's cool and he wants to monetize, but I'm doing this for me and I'm really enjoying it and just kind of what makes me laugh. And I had this paradigm shifting moment where I was like, I am living the dream. I get to talk to people like Rob Nunn. Like I get to go talk to these incredible people that are doing incredible things. I wouldn't recommend taking this route if, if you're just afraid to fail. Like the 9 to 5 makes so much sense. Part of me, not really, part of me does wish it's like, I could just be happy being an accountant and just working my 9 to 5 and
Yeah, sure.
making 100,000 or two, whatever it is, $150,000 a year with inflation, whatever that number is these days. But I'm not. And it's just inside a lot of people. And I'm thankful that feeling, like whatever it is inside so many people and people like you who, when what your mind goes to, as you say, is I want to go the whole U.S. grid. That's where my mind goes. I can't even help it. Like I want to go solve those issues. What my mind goes is when you brought up the farms is I wonder what he thinks about the farms in Netherlands and the Dutch farms and that
Right.
whole
Yeah, yeah.
issue. My
Yeah.
mind goes to debate. My mind goes to
That's
morality.
great though.
What's the right thing? What's the good moral decision? And that's not an easy. I like those discussions because there usually isn't an easy answer.
Yeah, well, I think the answers are quite easy, actually. I'm going to be quite controversial probably and say
Whoa,
that
cool.
maintenance of the status quo should always be preferable. The problem with politics, as far as I can see, and I know a lot of politicians, so this is probably and by the way, most of them American, not, although I know a lot of politicians in the UK and in France and a few in Germany, and we deal with politicians a lot and political institutions a lot. The funny thing that I find about politicians is that they're very quick, because they have to be, term limits being what they are, to make suggestions on radical change, which is hilariously ironic because the institutions they govern are the slowest to change and try and avoid change all on all counts, right? And so, from a governmental standpoint, status quo is probably preferable to immediate and sudden changes. And I won't necessarily give my opinion on the farming issue in the Netherlands. Although what I will say is that any impediment on an individual's ability to earn a living inside your own system seems to me to be counterintuitive. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you're trying as a government organization to limit an ability to produce or generate income or things that benefit internal markets, and you are doing your best to slow that up. That seems to me to be counterintuitive. That doesn't make sense. It makes sense. It makes a lot more sense, which most Western governments don't do, to restrict access from external markets to protect your internal ones, not attack your internal markets to protect external. That really doesn't make any sense to me. That's all I'll say on that. But and you see it with energy a lot as well. European energy strategy has been this side of awful for 45 years, and we are now seeing the consequences of that, which is prices. But prices don't even come close to this, to the extent of the problem. Pricing is what everybody feels when they actually have to deal with the consequences of this. But every finance person on the planet only talks about price. But from a political standpoint, what it means is we actually have had governments in Europe and Europe-wide. The Germans are kind of the worst offenders at this, but by no stretch the only offender. They actually have failed on the fundamental principle of government, which is to protect their citizens. They haven't done that. And so if they haven't done it with energy, what else haven't they done it with? And we haven't learned that yet. And that's my worry. It's like prices come and go, and they'll go up and they'll go down, and we'll fix that problem with energy. And they'll say it'll never happen again, and then they'll leave office and everything will be forgotten and we'll move on. But broadly speaking, something happened in Europe 40 years ago, before the Cold War ended, where we started to agree that energy independence was a bad thing. And then that energy independence being a bad thing became reliance on other people within the bloc. That's fine. But as your population grows and the population becomes more sensitive to environmental issues or whatever else, and they don't want to do shale fracking, they don't want to do gas, and the Russians do, The easy option for politicians to sweep it under the rug was to then, within the last 20 years, become highly reliant on somebody who was an active foe literally 20 years before and hadn't really changed fundamentally. And we are now suffering the consequences of that. War in Ukraine or not, this was going to come home to roost. The war in Ukraine just sped that up, I think. And that's just general policy. European policy in general, I'm quite scathing about European policy making. So I should probably be
Yeah,
a bit careful.
I see the American flag back there. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah. So a
anyone.
fantastic person called Ross Baines painted these for me. Who's a
They're
wonderful
beautiful.
person. People should go online, and he does flags, I think. But I actually saw him during COVID. He was doing these huge canvases like this, and asked him, "Can I get small ones?" So he's done me a few. These are two of them, but I don't have a European flag. I think that's probably, I've got lots of different flags, none of which are the European Union's flag. And I don't have a huge, I used to have a huge political view on the European Union. I don't actually have the same view that I used to. I was naiver and younger then. But broadly speaking, all governments, whether or not they're inside the European Union or not inside the European Union, have fundamentally failed in Europe to protect the internal market as they suggested that they should. And the UK being out of it or in it doesn't make any difference, really. Switzerland being sort of in, sort of out, doesn't make any difference. We have a stagnatory political will in Europe, and that has manifested itself into essentially Japan 2.0, where the UK is looking very like Japan was 20 years ago, and it will probably continue to look like Japan's economy now. Not bad, but not good. You know, it's one of those sort of end of empire, slow burns, high inflation, you know, high government intervention. You know, 30 years ago, the UK believed that free markets were broadly a good thing, capitalism was broadly a good thing in its true, in a truer sense, and then we had more social benefits than the United States, healthcare provisions, whatever else. So we believed in a slightly higher social protection, but only slightly compared to the US, but really would allow things to happen. Now we live in a essentially oligopolized / monopolized market with little to no competition and high government stimulus, which is essentially Japan in the early 2000s, late 1990s. And that only gets worse because when competition is stemmed for generations, nobody feels like they can be competitive in that market. Therefore, competition stops, corporates get even bigger, and they all essentially become government organizations. You're starting to see that a bit in the US. I mean, Jamie Dimon's been out this morning talking about how people should stop, the US government should ban short selling on banks, which I think was oddly self-serving.
That's
And
super
so,
self-serving. I
you know,
have
so
strong opinions on that one.
yeah, I mean, so like, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? He takes on a load of assets, nitpicks a load of assets from failing banks, puts them on his balance sheet where they're not fairly valued yet. They're going to have to be fairly valued at some point. And so the best way to do that is to take away one of the metrics in which we value stuff, which is short positions. And we did that in 2008 in the UK temporarily, but it killed competitive banking on a commercial basis here. And essentially all the banks here, and I don't want to speak too forcefully about it because it's not quite the case, but essentially all of the banks here are very protected and safe, broadly because they aren't able to do anything. And so you've still got some flexibility in the US banking system that we don't have in Europe anymore. And that's kind of starting to come to an end too. It's a 30 to 50 year process. You're about 20 years in, we're
Yeah,
about
I was
40
going to
years
say
in.
the flexibility, from my understanding, it's just a matter of you're decades ahead of us in this process. It's one of my topics I like to read about is finance in the banking world. And one of the books that I read that really sparked the interest was The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it just that book, it starts out by telling you how the central bank in America was formed, the Federal Reserve. But really the interesting part of the book, to me, the most interesting part of the book is it dives into the history of banking, how banking started, which were locksmiths that made their own safes. And then people would go to them and give them their money, their gold in exchange for these paper notes saying, I owe you 10 ounces of gold. And then that money started to circulate because it was worth what the gold was. And this whole story, and it breaks down the whole story and brings it all the way up to present day. And basically what you see happening in Europe and what we see happening here in the US, it's all happened before. And this inflation always has happened before. And, the US has gone into hyperinflation back when we were colonies. And we've defaulted on our debt before, which it's really funny to see politicians say the US has never defaulted on their debt and we never will. I'm like, we have. and it's a Google search away. And it's just it's funny. It's not funny. It's kind of scary, but it once you educate yourself on it, you see the patterns happening all over the world again, and you realize, as you said before, politicians will say, we're never going to let this happen again. They'll go away, and then it will happen again. So as societies, we'll see something horrible happen. For example, from that same book, George Washington, the founding fathers, they saw hyperinflation hit, and George Washington had a famous quote that said, "A wagon full of money will almost never buy a wagon full of supplies."
Mm.
And it was during times of hyperinflation they were fighting this war. So when they made the Constitution and they were drafting their new government, it was a huge part of like, hey, we don't want a central bank. We don't want to print money. It was a very big part because these 30-year-olds, they were like 20 fighting this war. Now the 30, they just saw what happened. But you fast forward 100 years, we don't know. And the perfect example of that is COVID. It was the most, oh my God, how do we not see this coming moment when you rewind 100 years, there was a global pandemic. Go another 100 years, there's a global pandemic. It's happening on clockwork, but we're a new generation and we don't know. We're not good historians.
That definitely surprised me with COVID, because it's like there is no, we had every epidemiologist under the sun on every news channel telling us that we're all going to die in different ways or weren't or whatever. And it was just information, 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 information. And the problem is that somewhere in the last 20 years, we've got into information overload, because like now there is too much information, we can't process it. And so we've now seen a rise of opinions over facts in an extraordinary way, purely because there's so much information that if people took enough time to digest it, they wouldn't be able to get their soundbite out quick enough. So we've got your view on it has to be broadcast in live time 46 seconds after it happened, but the nuance on it, which is the detail, would take you 20 years to read. And so we've got this, people just jump straight to narrative conclusions, which was fine to an extent, but like not, but we definitely saw it with the pandemic, every epidemic. What I was surprised with was there was absolutely no, and I might not, I did switch off from mainstream.
No, go. This is what it's for.
But, I switched off and thought, I've had enough of listening to COVID death numbers or whatever. But there was never any health historians or anybody who knew what happened during the Spanish flu and how they tried to contain it and whatever else. And I'm not suggesting that would have worked. I'm just saying and I'm not suggesting that the governments didn't have those information. It just wasn't told to us. Like, well, during the Spanish flu, the reason the numbers were higher was because the flu was actually like this and COVID's like this. And we're responding to it like this, but it's modern day. Plus, we've got a load of healthcare provision. I think it was all just assumed. But it's like it's a really bad thing to assume in a health crisis with a novel virus that you understand what's going on. And there was this profession of not absolutism, but like a profession of absolute knowledge that people were professing. And it's a bit like with the banking crisis we're seeing now. Yellen comes out and says the banking system's fine. I was like, well, how do you know that? Because you've not been on. If you knew that to be true with certainty, you wouldn't have to, one, say it, and two, no bank would be going bust. And so, and if it was, you'd be out in front of it saying why, but they weren't. They're behind it saying why, which means that I jumped to the conclusion that a lot of that's narrative pushing in order to protect the rest of the system, which I understand needs to happen. I'm not an idiot, but with the pandemic and with any sort of crisis, governments feel now, and I don't know if it was the case before, but they feel now to be a lot less adult. They're a lot less in charge of themselves. They're a lot less able to negotiate across party political lines. They are absolutely wedded to narrative, and they won't hear anything that would oppose that view until after their narrative has completed its journey. So only now with COVID, we're starting to see people who were, some of these people who are qualified epidemiologists who specialized in viral transmission were called lunatics because they were just asking questions about where the information was coming from, about some of the stuff we were told. Not to even disparage it as right or wrong. Just, what can we see this report? Can we, whatever. And we're only now saying, well, perhaps they had a point. Well, they didn't have a point. They were asking questions. And then they jumped to conclusions because they're like, well, hold on, what's going on here? You're not giving the information. And it's a bizarre thing. So we've got this perfect information, not perfect, overload of information in the system, a requirement to react to it in quick fashion, and then a political system which seems more wedded to opinion than it is to and
Oh,
narratives than it is to
it
facts
definitely
or
is.
objective views, just objectism. Like you can't go and have a political conversation with. I go to the US a lot. I don't have a particular view on political parties in the US. I don't vote in the UK elections. I used to be very politically driven. I'm not interested now. I broadly think we don't tend to get anything really different, and just a lot of people squawking with different coloured ties on. But it is interesting because you listen to some people and you're like, well, that part of the policy is interesting. When Trump was in power, there was some interesting policies that he had, certainly from a external person looking into America as an investment opportunity. It was interesting. Yeah, narrative wise, was he the best speaker all the time? No, but if Joe Biden's not exactly great either. I mean, there was no
No.
like, and some of Joe Biden's policies are really good, especially international cooperation, but not when it comes to how Afghanistan went down. And so it's just and really you're just sort of playing a much of a muchness a lot of the time, because everybody sort of it doesn't matter what happens. You can't tell somebody who's like a loyal Democrat that their candidate is can't speak some words, and you can't say to a mega Trump supporter that perhaps he's not this oracle you think he is. He's just he's a human being. Do you mean you can't have either conversation? You can't say to someone like in 2016, I was out in America a lot, and Clinton and Trump are going at each other in public, and I'm over there, and they're like, "What do you think of the elections?" And I was like, "I just don't know. I don't know." And like, "Well, he's awful." And I was like, "Yeah, but she's not." They're not the best candidates that they could have found either way. Is one better than the other? I don't know them personally. I've got no way of objectively answering that question apart from what I see. And one's a lot better at speaking in public diplomatically than the other. But I don't know if that's right or not. And it's just,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
horrendous in that
yeah,
sense.
when it
Try and
comes to all that,
for me to try and navigate it as somebody who's really not got a view on it anymore, and I'm trying to just sort of look to outcomes. That's great, but how do we put transmission lines down? You can't have a conversation a lot of the time without being pulled into that, which is interesting.
yeah, no, that when it comes to all that, I got a few opinions on that, but I am an optimist, as you are, and I don't care if people vote. It might be my hottest take, that because a lot of people seem to think I'm horrible for it, but I don't care if you vote. In fact, I think not voting in a system you don't think works is a good metric. I think it shows, hey, this system's broken and we need to fix it. I think if you make a conscious decision not to do it, it is a good civil duty thing. But beyond that, my optimist in me, when I look at data right now in America, I can't speak for Europe or anything like that, but we have 49% of people identify as independent. I'd be one of those
Wow,
people,
a lot, isn't it?
which it's an incredible stat. That's one of the most incredible stats I've seen in a long time, because you could argue it's the most unified we've ever been, at least in my lifetime, even though we are in this moment of, I'd say 2016 to 2020 was really the max of it, but we are in this moment of extreme division. Americans are starting to wake up to the fact that everything is fake news. And I owe Trump a huge debt in that regard, where I hated Trump in 2016. I'm from Kansas, so I went home from college and I was at a gathering of like 20 of my friends. It was 1 versus 19. They liked Trump and
Oh,
they
wow.
hated Clinton. And I just didn't get it. And then they didn't understand my point of view. And I was like, this guy sucks. I don't get it. Like, yeah, Hillary's not great, but this guy sucks. But he opened my mind to, oh, wait, there's fake news everywhere on all sides. I went from being a never Trumper or never certain people to, hey, no, everyone could offer good things. For example, Matt Gaetz and AOC, who I kind of despise both, far right, far left, they came together and they put together a bill for politicians shouldn't be able to trade stocks, which I'm 100% for. So
Yeah,
I don't want
100%.
to be a never Matt Gaetzer or never AOCer.
Well,
Or
not
never.
maybe not trade stocks, but not do they have to put them into a trust?
Yeah, I don't know the whole details of it. They're going to have a workaround for it. I guarantee it.
Oh yeah, of course
Whatever
they
it
will. Yeah,
is, their family's going to own it. But
it's
it's a good step.
profitable to just head it off.
Yeah, it's a good step. But with all of that, I do, and as politically interested as I am, and I very much am, it really intrigues me. But I kind of agree. I like the point you said. They're all just squawking with different colored ties. And I do
There you
kind of agree with that. The people that really change everything, and I think everyone has a place in the society and we all make it go. But the people that really change the generations, the ones that we really need, are people like you, the ones that are, hey, we're going to try and change the technology. We're going to try and help our people that grow the food and make sure that's sustaining, and like new energy and new ventures that's really what changes the world. And as we were talking about right before we hit record here, energy. If we can get energy abundance, which this is going to be thousands of years, so we're really at a point where, hey, we are energy abundant. We made it to the sun. We built a machine around the sun that harvests all the energy and
But you
whatever it
wouldn't want
is.
to do that.
And
You wouldn't want to do that.
they wouldn't want to do that.
No, there's too much energy in the sun. It would be, yeah, that would be. I mean, we would have to. The global energy consumption at the moment, I think, last time I checked, was about 70,000 terawatt hours a year. And if everybody got the same efficiencies that the United States could push onto its citizens as the highest energy consumer, which I think is about 30 to 35% in the next 100 years efficiencies. So that is, efficiency per hour, per kilowatt hour. And everybody in the world adopted that would go to, let me rephrase it, 70,000 terawatt hours at the moment. Consumption with not very much change will go to 120,000 terawatt hours. That's all energy sources: oil, natural gas, electricity, anything, gas for your car, whatever, will go to 120,000 by 2050. And I think by the end of the century, it'll be up and over 250,000 terawatt hours. And that is still with about half of the world's population living on less than 5% of the American or 10% of the American consumption. So if everybody went up to that consumption per capita, and you got to the terawatt hour consumption per capita of the US in, let's say, 2100, and everybody in the world had 2100, you'd be up and over, even with efficiencies and further efficiencies, which we don't know yet, obviously, but without further efficiencies beyond the ones we know, could work, would be over, back of like piece of paper calculation, probably 1.25 million to 1.5 million terawatt hours requirement. Now that's insane as an energy source, but to put it into context, if you were able to well about 2 minutes of the sun's energy, and you were able to, with low latency, move that to Earth, just on one side, the side of the sun that's facing us, and you're able to well it efficiently enough that you got all of the sun's energy for about a minute, you would get somewhere in the region of 4.5 million minutes of energy supply per minute of exposure, roughly. Maybe a bit more than that. Well, it depends actually. If you could do, depending how you contain it, could be a lot more than that, right? So, which is that's too much energy. It's too much energy. So if you're welling the sun, we would have to be like a multi-solar system species in order to require the energy pull. And also, we don't know what it does to the sun's stability if you were to pull it out. That's really nerdy of me, but there you go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. A little bit, actually.
But yeah, if you could do something like a massive solar farm on the other side of Venus, right, or something like that.
That's more so what I was thinking.
That type of thing. That would be. But then, I think fusion energy will just resolve that. So, to put it into context, like I know lots of people, I get told off every time I do a talk or like I'm on a Spaces talking about it or whatever, that fusion's ages away. But at some point in the future, we are going to have fusion energy. They've started to break containment. It's working. It just needs to be ramped up, and we get much better once we get breakthroughs in technology. I don't care if it's not in my lifetime, not in my children's lifetime, but sometime in the future, even if it's 500 years from now, we will learn how to contain a mini sun, essentially, in a fusion reaction. And when that happens, the kilowatt hour, roughly the kilowatt hour you get per kilogram of coal burned is about 7 to 10 kilowatt hours, sometimes 15, depending on the efficiency of the coal. Okay. And then with like natural gas, it's about 23 to 25. A kilogram of uranium in a fission reaction gets you 23 million kilowatt hours. So that shows you energy distribution to uranium. In a contained fusion reaction never turned off, it's almost infinite. And so, you could take every nuclear power station in the United States that's got, active and non-active nuclear cores in them, create a fusion reaction of the same size as one of those, and have more energy than the United States will know what to do with. And so I think that's the real breakthrough, is making sure we don't cause black holes by but making sure we could do nuclear reactions safely at a fusion level. That would be an exciting breakthrough to it. And there are so many amazing companies working on it now that I feel we are, as every decade goes by, going to get closer to that. We may even see something working in our lifetime, which will again end the requirement. This sustainable energy movement we're going through is super important. Wind energy, solar, to a lesser extent, hydro power and whatever else, some small modular nuclear reactors, battery storage, or other forms of storage. Some people are looking at hydrogen storage and like salt caverns and things like that, which was really interesting. All of that's fascinating, and that's going to definitely do us for the next 150 to 200 years. I think the minute we get fusion power, they won't be recommissioned at the end of their lifetime. It'll be economically stupid to do that. And people will, the solar energy as a concept will probably all but disappear, much like wood burning did here. But by the way, though, around the world, and people don't know this, we talk about an energy transition now from fossil fuels, which is a bit of a catch-all term because they're all kind of very different wild animals, but fossil fuels as a catch-all term, to sustainable energy. But something like 2.5 billion people didn't even get to participate in the last energy transition from wood to oil. And so there are people out there right now who are still cooking stuff with oil and oil burning stoves. There are people out there who are cooking on wood still, and they're heating their properties with wood, or say properties, huts, whatever, and wood. And so there are multiple energy transitions coming on, because if you really believe in a net zero environment, and I'm not entirely sure if I do fully believe in, certainly on the time scales, I think as a long-term goal, it's good. I think we can do a lot to reduce it now. I don't know if we can bring it to zero, but certainly not by 2050. I don't believe that at all. These guys are still out there. They don't even have access to sanitation or clean water supplies. They're cooking with wood. I mean, you're going to have to quantum leap these people from that to, past all of our oil burning industrial revolution, all past that, straight to modern day, high voltage electricity line delivery to mud. I mean, it's amazing. So there's so much happening in the world that, it kind of becomes interesting to see where transitions lie. And honestly, to your point a minute ago, that's why I don't really care about the political stream. And I deal with governments all the time. I mean, I see how they operate. Some of them are much better than others, but they're broadly much of the same animal, and they don't change very much, and they've got their policies they want to set, and they've been at it for years, and I don't see much change happening from that. I do see things happening with industry and people who care, and there's not actually enough people who care to do things. I speak to amazing people who are activists, who are trying to get policy changed, whatever else, and they've got a place. But at the end of the day, who is doing this? The reason we went into education, and my business partner's got a few companies in education space, we've got a view on education for skilling up and workforces, is because simply put, all of these goals are amazing, but there's nobody to build anything. There isn't the skilled labor force in the US. There isn't the skilled labor force in Europe. There is in China. I mean, like if you look at I think it was last year or 2021, I might have to look that up. The Chinese state graduated grid engineers, right? And the graduating class of 2022 for grid engineers was bigger than in numbers than there are grid engineers in the United States. There were more graduates of grid engineering in the US than there were grid engineers in the whole of the United States, qualified or not. And so, that is, that's a statistic of a country that's doing stuff. We can argue about the merits of China. I'm not China's biggest fan, but in terms of its government, but, that's the type of change we need to see in our countries in order to make things happen. And transitions don't happen without people doing them, not just people waving flags and shouting very loudly at cameras and throwing paint at paintings and covering themselves with orange juice.
I don't know if those people, in my opinion, really have a place. I think they need to figure out a better way to channel their energy and think more long term.
Think about the level of organization it takes to protest, and think about
that's different. That has a place. Yeah, but
to an extent. I'd love to see. There's some brilliant people who I know, and they've asked me to fund it, and I refused. Protests against oil usage or whatever else, and I understand why they're doing it. But it's like you're also denying the fact that we're actually making some progress in that. And what would be much better is if you were to focus your energy at speeding that up, not just shouting at the people you want to speed it up. Just speed it up yourself.
I agree.
We
I
live
mean,
in
it
an open market.
depends on the exact topic that we're talking
Well,
about.
of course
So
it is. Of course it is.
yeah, oil, economic things, like talking about the environment. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think there's a need for protesting anymore. Like everyone knows this is a thing now. Everyone know. I mean, some people may not believe climate change, or everyone has their opinions, but everyone has an opinion. Everyone has heard of this. Like it's a global topic, and it's something China is attacking heavily. Every country has an opinion on it. I don't think protests for that are necessarily worthwhile, in my opinion. But human rights, I think America has proven that the freedom of speech thing and all the protests that happen here. And if you look in Europe's history, there's tons of protesting that has happened that over time, you could argue has been very successful in changing government dynamics, especially in France. The protests have seemed to really work in France, historically speaking. So there's a place for it over the centuries. Over the centuries, I want to add, but there's definitely a place
One
for
of
it when it
my
comes
favourite statistics about the French, and I say this as an Englishman, and I love France, but I was in Paris a couple of weeks ago. One thing I will say about the French, my favourite statistic about protesting in France was that the French government issued this decree to say that they were going to increase the number of speed cameras. And the French were like, this is ridiculous. We've already got too many speed cameras, whatever else. Anyway, they passed this law to say all these speed cameras are going to be built. And so the French people went out and destroyed within a 3-week period 70% of all the speed cameras in France were destroyed. And I thought, I get behind that. It's very funny. It's the most French response to it. No other country in Europe would protest like the French do. It's quite amazing. In fact,
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know if there's any
they have a
country
very interesting
with the
history when it
democracy
comes to
they have.
protest. Yeah,
Yeah, they are. They win medals on that.
it's wild. It is pretty wild to learn about. But also to go back to the China topic real quick, their infrastructure and their good engineers. I didn't know that stat, but it made sense to me because they've always been ahead of the curve. They're a country I read about. I got into like a 2 or 3 month kick of I want to learn everything I can about China. So I read a
Yeah,
handful of books about
I've
it.
been down that journey.
And something that stuck with me, as most of the information, fades to the trash bin of your memory. Something that really stuck with me was they've always been incredible engineers. I didn't know that. I knew they were in my lifetime, in our lifetime. But you go back to even before Mao, pre-Mao, and in Mao's China, their infrastructure ability has always been top tier. They're able to build faster, better than anyone on the planet. Their big downfall has really been their governing structures. And something that scares me about the Netherlands is that when Mao won the war in 49, by 52, they controlled over half the farmland. And eventually that regime failed because of famine. And it seems to be a recurring theme, no matter where you go on the planet, that, the government takes control of the farmland, famine happens. There's a correlation. What's the causation? I couldn't tell you. I haven't studied it enough. But there's definitely a correlation there. And I think that's something.
We
I don't know.
generally do have a problem with politicians and, broadly speaking, the political institution, beyond the individual politicians themselves,
Yes.
of thinking that they can do things better than the people who've been doing. It's quite ironic to me that people who sit in Washington DC who probably never see like real grass in their entire life, whilst they're going from big impressive imperialistic building to big impressive imperialistic building to talk about policy, are creating policies that affect farmers in rural Iowa. And then they're telling the farmer in Iowa how to best farm and manage their land when they've been doing that very successfully for over 100 years. And these people have never been to Iowa. I thought I do. There is a detached irony to that, because you sort of sit there and you think, how did we end up in a system where people who live in cities dictate to farmers how best to put up hedgerows? That is quite impressive, and that not only is that accepted by everyone, but then campaigned heavily for. I think that's even more amazing. I don't know how they managed to pull that off. That's quite an incredible feat.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. It happens from my studies. It happens slowly over time, where I think Benjamin Franklin had a paper on it. I want to say he was the one that wrote it, where he's kind of like the theme of the paper was once every 300 years, you need a revolution because even if, and he said this even about America, which is it's about 300 years now. I hope we don't
Yeah,
need a
it's coming
revolution,
up.
but
You're almost done.
almost there. But you could see it, like his point, the overall point definitely still holds true. Where he says governments are gonna take, and they're gonna go bigger and more powerful because it is the nature of government to do that. And the American government, ironically, was created to be like the smallest government ever. And then here we are, a superpower, biggest government, biggest military ever. And his opinion was when he was studying history, he's like, yeah, every 300 years, it just gets too out of control and you need a revolution because it's just going to be too powerful. And you can see it. I think a great example is our farm laws and like how do you have a say over this? Like that is pretty wild. But a more recent example would be TikTok. Like I was for the TikTok ban. I don't have
Mm.
TikTok, despite it would help my growth a ton. And the reason I don't have is
I don't
I
have
just don't
TikTok either, actually.
I don't believe I don't, this is my opinion. I'm not comfortable with American data going to China, whatever it may be used for. I don't like our data being collected by American companies in the first place, but it is what it is. And so I was for the TikTok ban. And then I see the bill come out, and instead of saying TikTok can't be used in America, it's 1,000 different things about how, well, if this is deemed a security threat to America, then we can. It's just a power grab, and it's by the right and the left. And it's just like, oh my goodness, every crisis you use, you're going to keep us arguing about it, the masses, because we're all going to have our opinions, and it is what it is. But in the background, the government is just going to do what the government does, and it's just, oh, we're going to get more power for ourselves. And it's a strange thing if you zoom out and look at it century by century.
I think this time is slightly different to previous times. I mean, I do agree, broadly speaking, that revolutions need to happen. The problem that you've got is that, previously we have lived through periods of empire, but there have been combating empires. And so whilst the British Empire dominated the world scene, it wasn't exactly, uncontested. The French Empire was pretty big. The Spanish Empire was very argumentative with the British Empire at the start of its journey. The Portuguese went and dominated South America, and to this day, Portugal stands as the longest standing uninterrupted ally of the United Kingdom because of that, and broadly because they helped us with the Spanish. The German Empire came and went, the Russian Empire came and went, but broadly speaking, they were combating empires. At the same time, you had, like, if you look back to even like Romans, the Roman Empire had, the Egyptians to the south, which they managed to tame, but they didn't manage to tame any of the Arabias. And they came up against that in heavy forces and was still overcome. And so we've got this sort of like periods up until now, including when the United States managed to fight Britain off and gain independence, and also Mexico to the south and gain dominance there. There was this contesting element with it. The United States has no direct competitor. We are now living through a dominant US dollar period. The reason that the BRICS nations and others, I tweet about this a lot, but the BRICS nations and others are looking to try and do something, even if it's just talk, is because the US dollar is too strong. President Xi has been going around the world for the last 6 to 12 months, pleading with every country to trade directly with the yuan, because if they don't trade directly with the yuan, they have to peg it to the dollar and they lose money. And so the US consumer is more powerful than ever, and it doesn't look like that's slowing. If the US consumer turned off, you just went, right, I'm not buying anything from outside the US, the global economy crashes within 8 days. I mean, and in a bad way, countries fail. I mean, it's a huge problem. And now you've also got a dominance on military, which has never been seen before. 85 countries have got active US military bases in them. And so, the only international strike force competent military in the world is the United States. The Chinese are at best a fairly dominant regional force. If you were to try and attack the Chinese coastline, you would almost certainly be up against a huge defense force. The idea of China striking the United States, or striking anybody, frankly, outside of the Indian Ocean basin, and frankly, even then, even getting to India with any sort of strike force capability is laughable. They don't have the aircraft carriers, they don't have the support, and they're not going to compete on a nuclear basis because the Russians will not support them in a nuclear conflict. And so you've got this huge geopolitical. I'm a member of Chatham House in London. We always have these interesting. It's the Institute of International Affairs. We always have these fascinating debates. The BRICS nations fundamentally don't like each other. Brazil is there because it owes a lot of money to China, and it has to be. So South Africa. So they're kind of tagged along as developing nations, and they have an important role to play, but they're not the important player. The Russians are there because they think the Chinese are aligned in hatred of the West, but China isn't supporting it in Ukraine. And so that's not necessarily true. They've got countless border disputes. China and India hate each other. India's basically only there to get Chinese manufacturing out of China and into India, which is working. India is, people like India's joined the BRICS. India's in every international arrangement with everyone I've ever seen. They are the international fence sitter, and quite rightly too. They are not interested in engaging in international warfare. They always sit on the fence. They are only interested in making Indians wealthier, and quite rightly. And so they will join any beneficial potential bloc with anyone. They've got deals with Russia and the United States. They're part of the G20 and the BRICS and whatever. They're part of the Commonwealth. They're part of everything. They're just part of every group that you could possibly want to be part of in order to create more money flows into India. And so the United States, unlike previous empires where we had this revolution, somebody could take over, right? The Americans had that with the independence. You fought off the British and you had enough people to actually run the country independently. On the world stage, what replaces the US dollar in any short period of time? And I'm talking 100 years. What replaces the US empire? What replaces US dollar dominance? All this talk of dollar, and it always happens in recessions. Every recession since the 90s, we've been talking about dollar dominance going down, and it has gone down. It's gone down tiny percentages every year, and it's been broadly replaced by US pegged currencies like the euro and other things. So it's funny because we now live in a system where I don't know where the revolution's coming from, because the revolution inside America will bring down America and with it the world, and I don't think that will happen because I think Americans will cotton on to that. Europe's in no position to do anything. China might be, but it's unbelievably over-levered as an economy right now.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say China's
50 or 60 years away from being able to contest anything. And even then, it's got to go around the world and convince all these military bases, and it's got to one, have a consumer base which is competitive to the US, which is not impossible with the number of people they've got, but it's going to take a while. And then militarily, they're going to have to catch up. And then they're going to have to produce a currency which other people in democracies are going to want to adopt. And that's down to principles and values. And I'm just like, oh, I can't. It's so interesting. I don't know how the American empire, because America's done empire unlike any other nation's ever done it. The British, the Dutch, the French, we went around and invaded everyone. And then before that, it was the Romans. And before that, God, it was just people invaded people, and then we dominate you on a territorial basis. And the United States has managed to create an empire without really having to invade anyone. In fact, most of the people who have adopted the United States as a dollar system were in direct conflict with them at several times in the past. And so this, how is it that the Saudis have adopted dollar? The only time the Saudis are like, oh, we're not going to accept the dollar as this sort of dominant power anymore, but only when we're trading with China. Right? Okay, fine. It's not, and with the Russians, all right, cool, fine. So nothing major then. It's quite incredible. You look at it now and you think, if you were to go out and try and convince the world that, imagine the United States is as strong as it is now, but doesn't have the military bases and it doesn't have the world trading on the dollar as a standard. And so it goes out into the world and pitches it and it says, we're going to you go to the Saudis now and they go, we're going to position 35,000 troops, build 5 military bases, station a load of navy, and force you to use the dollar. They'd be like, who the hell are you? Like, what are you talking about? Nobody would agree to it, would they? And yet somehow, over the last 150 years, the Americans have amazingly achieved it. And I think that's going to be very hard to reverse. Not impossible by any stretch. And I'm not suggesting that anything that they're doing won't work. I'm just suggesting right now, I don't know how. I'd be interested to see how it works.
Yeah.
Not to go on a rampage about
dollars. No, I love it. It sparked a couple thoughts, actually. So I'm not going to have a bit of a ramble myself here, but it's a podcast. It's exactly what we're here for. So it kind of, have you heard of George Friedman or Peter Zahn?
Yeah.
These
George Friedman.
geopolitical.
I haven't heard Peter.
Yeah, so George Friedman, he's my favorite author that does these geopolitical long-term predictions. And in the next 100 years, which he's been spot on through about 11, what's been 15 years now. It's been pretty close to as close as you could get, right? You're not going to get everything right by any means, but he also doesn't have America being challenged for a lot of the reasons you've stated. In the next 100 years, he's saying like the first like actual challenge, not necessarily war, as you know, we're basically in a proxy war with Russia, and there'll probably be another proxy war with Taiwan and China. And he said the first war that America's actually have to fight is going to be with Mexico. But Mexico has this huge cartel problem, and it's 70 years away in his opinion. And I would agree with that, just from a pure military standpoint. But for me to go to a different direction here, one of my other thoughts here, I'm a very proud American, and I love this country, and I look at it from a point of view of it's just incredible what this country is, and it was built upon with the freedom of speech. And I mean, that's a giant thing, the freedom of speech that we have. But the entire world comes here. Every race, ethnicity, religion on earth is here in America, and by the time they're second generation Americans, you're American. Like, you're just fully American. And there's nowhere else on earth. Like, if you go back 300 years, maybe even less than that, 200 years, and you were to tell somebody, hey, no, this is country now, where no one's really from there, but they all have this identity. And you just couldn't really explain, like, what are they? Are they British? Are they German? Are they Saudi? Are they Japanese? Like, it was an unheard of thing, and it happened because of just the values the country is built upon. And all of a sudden, valuing freedom and valuing, hey, I'm going to go do what I want to do and follow my dream, and that American dream, quote unquote. Fast forward 100 years, 200 years, and all of a sudden you have the greatest empire the world's ever seen. And it's a pretty beautiful story. I mean, it's not without its horrible plots. Like, one of the reasons nobody's from here is, well, there's a huge genocide. That's why no one was from here. The Native American population is very poor.
I mean, it's one of these weird things, though, that I find that very strange. It's an interesting thing when people talk about slavery or whatever. Slavery and history and genocide and conflict and invasion are part of the human story since we started being humans. And I think we have to learn from those as best we can. I don't know if we can fully learn, because we don't have the context of the time. We only have the context of our opinions now, which is not probably helpful when looking at history completely. But we can take the lessons of history in our current context and try and understand them. But if we're to try and understand, I don't think it's massively helpful to dwell on it too much, because at the end of the day, yes, the United States has got a challenging history, so does every country. However, the outcome has been better for everybody as a result, broadly speaking. In fact, I would argue there's no, and I'm also in no way dismissing problems of the past and trying to forget them. I just think that we should confine them to history, keep them, teach them, learn from them, learn all aspects of history, not just narrative history, and then use that, understand how privileged we are to be in this position, accept therefore that all of the challenges we face today are surmountable. We can get past them. Use those lessons of history to try and get past them, and then every generation it gets better. And statistically, that is true. That has happened. Human beings. This is the best time to be alive as a human being in the history of human beings. There is no other time that I'd rather go back to, because the little things you take for granted would be the things that kill you previously. So I don't want to live in a country which is overtly racist or whatever. Well, nobody wants to live in a real country, unless you're a racist. Nobody wants to live in a country that's overtly racist. Well, I think we can all agree to that. However, if you want to go back 100 years and think that's better, I'm sticking. Thanks very much. I'd much rather have today's problems than those problems. Dentistry. That's okay, fine. Let's go back 300 years and get a tooth taken out, see if it kills you or not. It's just a bizarre. We don't think about it like, oh, I've got a bit of a hole in my tooth. I'll go to the dentist. I'll have my teeth done. Fine. It's a bit sore, and then this afternoon I'll get on with my job again. I mean, that would potentially killed you 300 years ago.
Yeah.
As an infection goes, there's no way to fix that. So there's that on a very fundamental level. You're like, we are living in the best time. And to your point a minute ago about Russian conflicts and proxy wars, United States, Britain, the G7 has been active in proxy wars since they were founded. The issue in Ukraine, although at the top of people's agenda today, and I understand why, and I'm not in any way a supporter of any aggressor in any country, is the same plot that we've had in every single non-direct conflict war between two major superpowers since we invented superpowers as human beings, way back when they were invented, when the Roman Empire was engaged in active proxy wars. I mean, it's not new, and it doesn't really end up changing the narrative too much. What it's really sad, and people lose this because we jump straight to get a lot of people on Twitter Spaces and podcasts and whatever else jump straight to what if World War III happens. I'm like, well, World War III, there's two scenarios. World War III happens or it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
I'm an optimist, so I'm going to assume that everybody, in the words of Sting, I hope the Russians love their children too. I'm assuming that nobody is that stupid. We went through a whole Cold War when nothing really happened apart from proxy wars. So what I'm learning from this Ukraine conflict on a macro geopolitics standpoint is that the Cold War really didn't end; it just paused for a little while, right? So that's the real sad part of that. The ultimate sad part of that, and really doesn't get any airtime because we kind of ignore fighting and we start talking about war and is Putin ill or whatever else, is the countless number of civilians who have been killed in that conflict for really no other reason apart from geopolitical posturing by two superpowers that don't like each other. And that is the thing that's ultimately makes me very sad, and I'd like to see stop. And people can talk about Ukraine on a political level. I've got no problem with that. Yes, it's a country, it's been invaded. That is absolutely wrong. I think we will probably agree with that. I'd like to think most people agree. Most civilly minded, decent people agree that you shouldn't be invaded. But fundamentally, I just want to see people stop being killed. I just don't think dying is the appropriate way of dealing with essentially proxy wars now, and we all seem very happy with that. And it's so hypocritical. People are like, well, Russia's a terrible aggressor here, let's arrest Putin and take him to The Hague. Yeah, well, maybe, but also, every country that's got a military force in the last 100 years has abused its power on the world stage. Nobody's been free of that. And so, to what extent, it's such a bizarre time. And I think we've been privileged in our generation to live through probably the most peaceful time in human history up until now. And so this is, again, starting to become quite alien to us. Whereas to my grandparents, it's probably not that. They saw Korea happen and Vietnam and straight after World War II and all of the proxy wars that happened between World War I and World War II, Japanese proxy wars in China and God knows what else before that. They saw all of that, and that was quite normalized, a lot more normalized. And we haven't seen it for a while, and it's very close, so people are kind of sensitive to it. But there's been proxy wars happening all the time. North Korea and South Korea are still technically at war with each other. That hasn't even ended. It's been 70 years. They haven't actually reached a peace agreement. So they've only got essentially a very long-standing ceasefire. And so, that's the last. Afghanistan's a proxy war in many ways. I mean, so it's just, and it's sad. That for me, that's the saddest part. And we've kind of got into this sort of complicated world scene where how is it, I find this really funny. How is it that policymakers have got themselves into a position where we're now in a position where we allowed energy security to lapse, but proxy wars are fine. And that seems like we're adamant about this, but we're not adamant about, it doesn't seem to add up. And I think it's because they all sort of sit. We've seen it with so many politicians now where they come out and they're like, they have a view on things, and that's fine. They're entitled to that view, and then won't defend people's right to free speech. And I'll be sitting there thinking, that doesn't make any sense. You used your free speech to get elected. I find it's bizarre. Your opinion's fine, but that opinion's bad, so we'll get rid of that opinion. You're like, well, no, you just qualify that opinion out of it. The best way to stop people having an opinion on something, not having an opinion, but pushing an opinion you disagree with, is with evidence. And then they look stupid, and you can stop them, having an audience. It just doesn't happen anymore. It's shouting and pointing and sort of quite hypocritical and very sort of, it's kind of an underlying sentiment. And all these, when we're saying about energy, we really want to do this net zero thing. And I'm like, great, well, where's the grid engineers? Well, we're not going to. The same year that the United States started pushing the Paris Agreement the first time was the year that they stopped co-funding grid engineering around electrical qualifications. They stopped subsidizing the qualifications. It's like directly opposed to the policy. It's a bizarre thing, and it happens. I was in the US, sorry, it was in the UK. In the UK, and you're sort of sitting there thinking, this is a bizarre juxta. I don't know what's coming from where. I've gone off on a really weird tangent there, but broadly speaking, I find it very strange.
No, that is. I didn't know that. I hope the U.S. didn't also go that
Wouldn't be
route, but
surprised.
things we choose to subsidize are often a mystery to me. I believe, maybe another hot take, I believe we should subsidize people. I see all the subsidizing we do around this country into random things that I really just think are due to lobbying and corporate interest. And one of my beliefs is UBI, which I've studied. I mean, I got my CPA, I've studied tax code, and I understand a decent amount of how the money flow works in this country. And it would take a radical shift, but it's possible. It's very much possible in this country that we could do that. It would just, is it probable? No, but that's just because of interest in politics.
So do you support a UBI, a universal basic income?
I do. I mean, our tax code would have to look different. Really the subsidization, what we subsidize would have to look different. But I think that this is a completely different direction what we're talking about. But yeah, I do. And I think COVID, when we gave out a few $1,000s to everyone making less than $70,000 a year, and then we gave out a few $1 billion to all these corporations and have to pay them back. I think it proved, in Alaska has proved this, and the evidence is out there. That proved that, hey, trickle-down economics was a joke, but this trickle-up economics, all the money, virtually all of it, ended up back with corporations. And it proved that, hey, people are going to spend this money and it's going to help the economy. It's all the money flows going to work and be there. We're able to do it and not print money. That's the big thing, is you have to do it correctly. You can't print more money, as I think even people who aren't interested in economics have learned over the past 4 years, is that, inflation happened because we printed a ton of money. I think something people like you and me are interested by economics, duh. But I have lots of friends and family who aren't interested by that topic, don't talk about this stuff, and they've realized this over the last few years. And so we have to do it correctly. But if you do it correctly, which is really just don't print money, and you're able to filter all this money that's up top back to filter all the money that's on the top and, with the 1% back to the poorest of the 99%, it does end up back at the 1%. We've seen it happen time and time again. And COVID is just the most recent example of that. And I think you want to help people. And I think it's an American value too. A lot of people will shout socialism. It's like a lot of people on the right that don't want this will shout socialism, and it's not going to, whatever goes along with that, and communism and stuff. But in my mind, it's the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite of that. It's the ultimate freedom. You're choosing people and allowing people to just do what they want. You get the government out of their lives, because right now my biggest issue is a lot of Social Security, depending on state, but a lot of it is there's so much oversight and insight by the government into your life. Malcolm X wrote about this in his book. Obviously, that was a different time, but the same principle really is still there. When he was on welfare, he saw the amount of oversight and just control the government had over your life when you're on that. And from my understanding, it still works very similarly. And I think this is just the perfect way to reduce that and increase individual freedom while allowing a safety net. And every time I read more about it and I learn more about it, it just makes more and more sense to me. Saying that, that's not my number one thing on my docket list of things I want to see change in this country. There's a lot of things. That is just one of them. And it's funny to me. It's funny to me that it's supported by people who would identify more so on the left than on the right. Because in my mind, it's a conservative take. It's not a progressive take. It's just like, hey, this makes much more sense. Smaller government, bigger individual freedom. That's just not how it's viewed. And maybe my view of it is incorrect, but I studied it a lot. So I'd be shocked if that worked in a different way. But yeah, no, just one of my hot takes. I have plenty. That one, I thought it was ridiculous when I first heard about it too. I think that's the natural response, is to like what? No, you can't do that. And common sense, just right, your gut instinct right off the bat says no. But then I opened my mind to it. I talked about it, and I saw different programs around the world and in this country, and then COVID. And when I saw the data from COVID, I was just like, oh, this worked exactly how we thought it would work. It worked better than we thought it would work. Everyone spent that money. It went to the people that needed it, and it got spent on rent. It got spent on groceries. It got spent on like, the number one new purchase with TVs. All the money went back to the economy, all of it. And it ended up back with the corporations. And it seems like a natural filtering cycle that if we don't print the money, we just cycle it, it works. Yeah. Anyway, I can get off that topic. We've been going for an hour 30. I would love to ask you a few closing questions here. So, a big fan of Lex Friedman, and some of these come straight from him, but you're a space guy. So I assume when you look forward to the future, you're thinking space. 100 years from now, what's the ideal scenario? What's the likely scenario, I suppose? But what's your optimistic scenario as well of what we're looking at when we hand the world to the next generation?
Oh, wow. From a space perspective or in general?
Let's go in general, and then maybe after space.
I'll throw in a space perspective at the end. The next generation, well, my children's generation, I guess, or their children's generation, are going to face a slightly different challenge. It will be unity over anything else. It won't be resources, I don't think. But in terms of, in general, I would like to see a planet that has genuine equal opportunity. And I don't mean political equal opportunity. I mean genuine, like basics, bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, equal opportunities. They have access to the same level of sanitation, water supply, healthcare, basic healthcare, energy supply, education as everyone else. And sure, it'll always be weighted, but in general, just access to basics. And I think the unlocking of creativity over the next 25 years, and AI is going to certainly enable the execution of creativity a lot better, will create a vastly different planet, which I broadly believe will be a lot better than it is today, because we live in a planet which has been bettered generation on generation. I think we're all acutely aware of most of the problems facing the world, and therefore the next generation will benefit from, and sure, have things to fix, but benefit from the fact we were conscious of that and did something about it. And I certainly want to be someone who has made in charge, or a part of a group of people who have made positive strides to making that equality of opportunity open to as many people as possible on a fundamental Maslow's level. And I think if we can hand that over, most likely we will hand over a world which is much more open, much more dynamic, much better executing, have better basic needs, less people in, ideally no people in any poverty situation that we would identify today, at least. That would be amazing. On a space level, space has a very important role to play in that. Beyond Elon's goals of getting to Mars, which I think is incredible vision of his, and it seems to be getting closer by the month. But on a basic level, space has an enormous. You think about the coronavirus pandemic. We can argue, but at the end of the day, it most likely now, it would appear, came from a lab leak of some kind. Let's take that risk, even if it wasn't genuine from COVID. But the risk of a lab leak is still very real, of things that are probably far worse than COVID. Space, you can do that in containment, for example, right? So you could use that as an example, as the future of healthcare could be space-derived, because if something goes wrong and it gets leaked out, into the vacuum of space and it doesn't matter. And so you've got containability, you've got imagery. People talk about, perhaps we shouldn't be looking to the stars because we haven't worked out what all the problems on Earth is yet. But I think, a higher perspective on that would be better. Observing our oceans, understanding the real effects in real time of climate change and real effects of any climate movements, weather pattern changes, the goods and the bads of that can all be identified from space. And then the third is the democratization of communication. At the moment, we are governed by communication networks which were built long ago and that are very reliant on governments allowing you to communicate. The minute that becomes satellite communications, they can't control that anymore. There's no turning off that tower or shutting the internet down. That doesn't work anymore, which enables a lot of countries to get past a style of leadership which is not appropriate, and enables others to democratize even more, which is never going to be a bad thing. I'm massively pro breaking up corporate monopolies in markets and giving more people more control over their basic utility requirement. And I think honestly, 100 years from now, the world will be closer to an individual, democratized basic utility. I don't know if we were going to fix all of the things up the Maslow hierarchy. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that, but hopefully we can as well. But certainly where I'm focused, I'd like the basics covered, and we're not covering the basics yet. So until that's done, I'm only going to focus on that.
That's a beautiful answer. I'm very glad we have Rob Nunn working on things in this world. That is very, very cool. All right. And then my next question would be, I see all those books behind you. Do you have any book recommendations, favorite books, paradigm shifters, anything at all?
Yeah, probably a few actually. One of my favorite books, although it's kind of a corny one that everybody in the finance world uses, is Outsiders. Actually, would be worth reading, which is essentially how the likes of Warren Buffett and other people manage money and opportunity. There's a great book, John Cleese's autobiography, So Anyway, is a really good book, because I don't know if you're into comedy, but and Monty Python, but I don't know, if really liked that read. Really good. They're probably not like the most. I don't like guru books or another too much, although I've got plenty of them here. But God, it's a good question. I have to turn around. Oh, actually, yeah, Walter Isaacson. Anything by Walter Isaacson's good. Biography.
Walter Isaacson.
Yeah, so he did a biography on Steve Jobs, but I really liked his book on Leonardo da Vinci, who I'm absolutely obsessed with now. Da Vinci is a fascinating person to learn about. Like what in any other context would be, and it also kind of opens up an opinion in my head, which is, Da Vinci is remembered because he was quite clearly genius. This is the guy who comes up with like the invention of the helicopter in a basic principle and then paints the Mona Lisa on the side. This was like absolutely insane. But the main reason we remember him, and this is to your point about content creation, actually, the main reason we remember him is because he wrote his diaries down. So we knew that, which makes me think how many more people were way more impressive than Leonardo da Vinci that we'll never learn about because they never wrote anything down or captured it in any way. So we look at these people at history and we think, Da Vinci or whoever, doesn't matter. It could be Picasso, it could be Mozart, it could be any of these amazing people we look to for inspiration in history. But for all we know, they were nowhere near as close to the level of genius that was available. That statistically, it's unlikely that they were actually the top of their game. They were just much better at documenting it and commentating on it and making sure that the thing was saved and played. And essentially Mozart got famous because he was a great publicist of his own work. He was able to get it played. And yes, it's amazing work, but like how many other people who were way better than him never got that because they never got it played by symphonies in Eastern Europe and wherever else. So that plays in my head a lot. There's a great book called Factfulness, which I think is at the top there. It is. Anything by Václav Smil. It's very energy and it's very hard reading, but that's a good one. I am absolutely. Jeremy Clarkson makes me laugh as a book writer. Any of his stuff is good. I've got a bit of a random thing for Harry Potter novels. I quite like the Harry Potter stuff.
Really?
I've reread that too many times. It's probably a little bit.
Are you a sci-fi guy at all?
I do like sci-fi. I don't read sci-fi stuff. I do watch sci-fi stuff. I'm massive Star Trek fan. Huge Star Trek.
Star Trek guy. So my favorite, I'm a nonfiction reader for the most part. The topics interest me, but my favorite fiction book I've ever read was actually Thrawn. I want to say it's Timothy Zahn. It's a Star Wars book. It's a story of quote unquote villain in the Star Wars universe. I've never been more blown away by someone's writing. Crazy things happen in one chapter, and the next chapter he explains how the guy pulled it all off, and it was an incredible read. It's probably the fastest I've ever read a book. I listen to most of my books. Really? I'm always like driving places or hiking or running or whatever it may be, and I'll listen to most of my books. But I read that book and I read it very quickly, which my ADD is usually off the walls when I'm reading. It's kind of like why I like to listen, is because I can stimulate my vision while I'm, learning.
Yeah, I read a lot. I have to read 5 books at a time now.
Really?
4 or 5 at a time. So I have 5 on the go, because if I get sort of like, if I struggle to keep on one, I'll just move on to one. So I'll read like a chapter and I'm like, not getting that one today, I'll move on to the next one. So I have to like keep that going.
Certainly I usually have 3 at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Um,
that's good. I think that's healthy, and I think they should be about different things as well. That's helpful because then
yes.
you're able to separate them out. My favorite book of all time, or books of all time, is the Douglas Adams series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. I think he's one of the sort of it's fantastic, and it kind of gives you a weird insight as to, I think everybody sort of overuses Orwell as the futurist Orwellian future that we live in, and I actually think while some of that might come true, I don't know, but I think Douglas Adams' future will be probably more likely. It's all sort of an accidental merging of all of these entities into things that sort of work, and we'll all end up just sort of patching on as we always have with sort of new problems. I find the whole context of that, that how he introduced an AI robot with Marvin, the paranoid android, who's been programmed to be paranoid about things, into the context, and they just drop him in, and nothing changes. This robot could dominate the world, but can't be bothered. And so it's all kind of very fun. Excuse me, very funny. I do love Douglas Adams for that, and actually he was sort of toying with the idea of alien invasions and how most of us just wouldn't notice. So, he landed this massive spaceship in the middle of a cricket green in southern England, and they get out, and all these aliens are on the cricket green and stuff, and the whole audience just doesn't know what. And one of the aliens turns to the human that was with them and says, "Why aren't they paying any?" Or the human says to the alien, "So why aren't they paying any attention? A massive spaceship's just landed in the thing." He goes, "Big spaceship lands in the middle of a human thing," and he goes, "What do you do?" Just carry on watching the cricket. Yeah. That's a bit weird, and then we just ignore it. There's this whole sort of context to that, and I thought that's quite hilarious. And he posed an idea in one of his diaries, I think, which was the whole, we've been invaded already, and we never noticed, and that's because we assume that aliens will look and sound or will be the size of us, and actually, they're probably snails or something, something stupid. He kind of posed the idea that it would be nothing like us, and therefore would we even notice them arriving? First contact we assume would always happen with us, but it might have happened with a rat 150 years ago. Just no idea. It was fascinating, and I also loved. He created the idea of a world that were run by mice, and the humans turn up, and they design planets. These mice, right? So they design planets, and they designed us. So they met the people. They met the mouse that designed certain aspects of Earth. And he's talking through it and all this type of stuff. And people are like, the human goes, "Well, we as human beings run experiments on you mice," and all of the mice start laughing. And it's sort of like, "Oh, bless them, they think they're running experiments on us. What, because you make us run around tracks?" That's such a human perspective. And I just think that is just, I love that. It was a whole juxta how important it was, taking all of the sort of self-importance of humans and turning on its head completely. I love that type of work. So yeah, I highly recommend people read the Douglas. If they haven't already, reread them. They're fantastic.
That's on my list of books to read this year, and I've actually never read that one. So
Well,
I'm
read
trying
them.
to get
So the whole series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. Read all the series. They're quite short books.
no, yeah, very short, and it would help me with my book count this year. I want to hit 50 books, but then I choose these books that are massive, or 30 hours of listening, and it's like, and I love them. They're interesting, but not on the path to 50 at the moment. But that's great. I'll have when I go back to these episodes, I have an editor that edits everything, but the first thing I watch are kind of these last questions I ask. It's like, okay, what were the authors' names and the books' names? I write them all down, and I got some good books there. I appreciate that. So my last question, which if you listen to the end, you've heard this one before, but in your opinion, what is the meaning of life?
Wow. Oh. That's a good question. I would be, I don't know if it's going to sound too corny or not, but it's probably the truth. The meaning of life, certainly for me, is to better my children's existence. There's few things that motivate me personally more than seeing them do better than I did, and I will. Doesn't matter if it's professional or not. Actually, it's personally just do well and they're happy and whatever else. I've got 3 answers. There's that personally.
Please give them.
So yeah, on a personal mission level, there's that. on a personal, emotional level, it's to have fun. You're only here for a very short period of time. It's all the time you'll ever have. So it seems like a lot to you, but in the grand scheme of anything, you will not be remembered beyond a very short window. The universe will blink and miss you, so you're not here for a very long time. So don't spend time, and I was certainly guilty of this when I was younger, trying to understand how other people are trying to do it. It's just sort of get on with it and enjoy it and have fun, and roll with the punches a bit, and just try and turn up every day. And then on an emotional, I guess, like this personal emotional level, sure, but love somebody or love people, love your family, find people to love, friends, whatever, and enjoy their company. Because again, I've had people die, people have died, and friends have come and gone, and so you kind of don't really realize what it's all about until that happens, and I think that's kind of missed. So that's kind of emotional level, and then I guess on a macro, from everyone's perspective, my greatest hope is that everybody is able to maximize the expression of themselves in some way, if that's art or opportunities or businesses or whatever else, because clearly we are wired from a chemical basis to yearn to express ourselves in whatever way that is. I don't care if it's something really that people view boring or people view very exciting. I don't care if you're a top financier or you're a energy guy or you're a podcaster or you're some sort of Ed Sheeran songwriter, or that doesn't matter. Being able to express yourself and finding conduits to express yourself is a good thing, and so people should do that. So those three things, I think it's like one thing. I think it's probably the meaning of life is probably whatever the sum of all that is.
I'll have to write it all down and build the formula for it, but I think these are all, again, beautiful answers.
Yeah, I just like love, laugh, have fun, do something meaningful. If you're a family person, make it better for you make it better for your children. The one thing that I do find hard to listen to is that everybody's trying to make everybody's lives better all of the time, and actually, if everybody made their own lives better and their own children's lives better, you wouldn't need as much macro involvement in supporting everyone. You would only be picking up people who didn't have that type of support. You wouldn't be trying to cover everyone's basis. I think if people who have got the position to do it, then we can really focus on the people who don't have access to it, and we can identify those people and make their lives better too. But at the moment, everybody's kind of not really, but like everybody's kind of looking for some bigger power to save them or not save them, but progress them. And actually, I think some responsibility to do that yourself it is a wonderful thing, and people should try and do that. I know it's very difficult, and it's very easy for me to say on a podcast, but it doesn't make it less true, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if I've said this on a podcast yet, but one of the discussions I have a lot, one of my older brothers in particular, it's kind of funny. I have a very progressive brother, I'd call him libertarian brother. And then the oldest one doesn't really care too much for politics, but my libertarian brother, he says that what's happening in the White House doesn't matter nearly as much as what's happening in your house. And I completely agree with that. And I think it's funny because I'm definitely a centrist that probably leans left towards new ideas and all that. But I think on an individual level, purely individual, you should be a conservative. You should want to strive to, hey, you should have the mindset of no one's coming to help. This is all my responsibility. Everything 100% on me. I think every single person should have that mindset at an individual level, because I think that's how you get the most out of life. I think that's how you'll find your most success, whatever success means to you. But that's how you find your most success.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So I love your answers.
Responsibility is an odd one because it's a scary thing, taking on responsibility, but it also is the only thing of which people define you on. And so if you don't take on responsibility, you are undefinable. And that is way worse than the fear of taking it on over time. Today, it's the old doctor's adage, isn't it? An apple a day keeps the doctor away vibe, i.e. do the right things and the doctor doesn't need to see you as much. And the problem is with that adage is that if I don't have an apple today, and then people have that view, which is, if I don't have an apple today and the doctor doesn't come, therefore I don't need to eat an apple, this is a dumb thing. And you're thinking, no, it's the compound effect of an apple a day keeps the doctor away, not an individual day of eating an apple, right? And so responsibility is that compound effect. It's not, if I don't take responsibility today, nothing bad happened. True, probably true. It's the compound effect over the whole of your life, which will be the negative, not by not taking responsibility, not today. You can get through on a day-to-day basis if you want to. It's not a great way to live life, though. And so taking on responsibility is a good thing. And I don't think people should think too hard about it. I think they should just do it. And actually, they'll find a lot of fulfillment in that. In fact, we live in a very privileged position in the West where we actually get to think about taking responsibility before taking it. Most of the world doesn't even get that privilege. I think that might be part of the problem.
Yeah.
I think responsibility is an amazing thing and people should take it when it's duly right to take responsibility. It's not always right to take responsibility for everything. Sometimes you do have to look after yourself first, or you have to defend yourself or whatever else. But for your family, for your own future, that is a wonderful thing to do, and everybody should do it. And the world would be a lot better if everybody did. And we could help the people who can't take responsibility for themselves, of which is in actual terms is a very small number, a lot more, because we'd be able to identify them, and we can't identify them, I don't think, as much anymore, which is certainly changing. I think that sentiment is changing, but yeah, responsibility is a good thing. Hard, but a good thing. But all things that are good are hard.
On that note, I appreciate your time today, sir. This has been incredible. I've learned a lot, and it has made. I'm an optimist, but I'm even more optimistic now, knowing Rob Nunn's out there doing great things. And
well, it's unbelievably generous of you, but thank you.
No, thank you. It's again, like, one day, hopefully this is a big enough platform where I can make money and do it for a living, or at least partly for a living. There's other things I'd like to tackle as well. But until then, I'm definitely living the dream still, is being able to meet incredible people like yourself. And it's been a very, very cool journey for me. I thank you for being a part of it. I'd love to talk to you again down the road and hear what you're working on and the books you've read and all of that good stuff, because I feel like we could go another 2 hours here. But I'd like to get you back to your kids, and I'm going to tackle some work here myself. So until next time, sir, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on the Good of Twitter. And good luck with everything.
Thank you very much.